It was one of those hot, quiet afternoons in downtown Los Angeles. The sun hung heavy over the streets, traffic was slow, and everything seemed ordinary until the extraordinary happened. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal, two legendary action icons, were sitting in the front seat of a black SUV, heading toward a charity event for underprivileged kids. Both men were laughing, trading old stories about movie sets. When Chuck suddenly slowed down near an old street corner, something unusual had caught his eye. Across the street, a young black boy, no older than 15, stood near a broken-down building. He was waving his arms in sharp, deliberate motions, pointing toward a parked car, then back at the building. His hands moved quickly, repeating a pattern that looked to an untrained eye suspicious. Seagal leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. "Chuck, you see what I'm seeing?" Chuck nodded, eyes fixed on the boy. "Yeah, looks like he's trying to signal someone." The boy looked around nervously. Every few seconds, he'd glance at his wristwatch, then repeat the same hand movements. To Chuck and Seagal, both men with years of experience spotting danger, it looked like some kind of coded signal. "Maybe a lookout. Maybe a deal going down." Seagal's tone turned serious. "This neighborhood's had a few gang-related incidents lately. Could be a lookout or worse." Chuck exhaled slowly, eyes thoughtful. "Or it could be nothing. But let's make sure." They pulled the SUV to the side of the road. The engine idled quietly. Chuck removed his sunglasses, scanning the street. Calm but alert. Seagal adjusted his jacket, stepping out beside him, his trademark stoic presence instantly drawing the attention of a few nearby pedestrians. The boy froze when he saw them. His eyes widened. His movement stopped. Chuck raised a hand, voice steady but firm. "Hey kid, you okay? What are you doing here?" The boy hesitated. His lips parted as if he wanted to explain, but no words came out. He took a step back, visibly nervous. Seagal crossed his arms, watching carefully. "We're just asking a question, son. You don't have to be scared." But the boy's silence only made things look more suspicious. His eyes darted between them and the parked car, his breathing uneven. Then, without warning, he lifted his hands again and started signaling. The same sharp, precise movements as before. Chuck frowned. "You see that?" "Yeah," Seagal muttered. Same signal again. "He's warning someone." They exchanged a look. That silent understanding that only men trained for action share. Chuck took a slow step forward. "Listen, kid, if you're in some kind of trouble, we can help you. But if you're up to something dangerous, this is the wrong way to go about it." The boy shook his head quickly, but still didn't speak. His hands moved faster, his eyes desperate. A car door across the street creaked open. Seagal's instincts kicked in. His hand moved to his belt, not for a weapon, but ready for defense. The tension in the air thickened. "Stay here," Chuck said quietly, starting to cross the street. The boy's breathing quickened. "No, wait!" he finally shouted, when his voice cracking with fear. "Please don't!" Chuck froze mid-step. Seagal stopped beside him. For a few long seconds, everything went silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. The boy's hands dropped to his sides, trembling. His eyes filled with tears. Something about that look, the fear, the confusion, told Chuck Norris that something wasn't right. Seagal glanced at him. "You still think this is what it looks like?" Chuck shook his head slowly. "I'm starting to think we might be wrong." What these two men were about to discover in the next few minutes would completely change how they saw the world and themselves. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Chuck Norris stood in the middle of the street, his boots planted firmly on the hot asphalt, while Steven Seagal stood slightly behind him, watchful, calm, but ready for anything. The boy's trembling hands were half raised as though frozen mid-signal. His lips parted again, struggling to form words, his eyes darting between the two men and the dark sedan across the street. Then finally he shouted, his voice breaking under pressure. "Please. Don't go near that car." Chuck stopped in his tracks. "Why not?" The boy looked terrified. There's something inside. My little sister, she's stuck." Seagal's eyes narrowed. "What?" Before either man could react further, the boy sprinted toward the parked car, waving his arms wildly now, not as a signal, but in panic. Chuck and Seagal exchanged one quick look, then followed. As they reached the car, they could see through the window. A small girl, maybe 5 years old, trapped inside. Her tiny hands were pressed against the glass. The doors were locked and the car was off. She wasn't moving much, just weakly hitting the window. Windows fogged up. Chuck said quickly, his voice shifting from suspicion to urgency. "She's overheating." The boy was already pounding on the driver's side window with his fists. "I told my mom not to leave her. She went inside for just a minute. Please help me." Seagal didn't hesitate. He took off his jacket, wrapped it around his arm, and with one powerful strike shattered the glass. The sound echoed down the block like a gunshot. Within seconds, he reached inside and unlocked the door. Chuck carefully pulled the little girl out and laid her on the curb, checking her breathing. She was alive, weak, sweaty, but breathing. Chuck took a water bottle from the SUV and gently poured a few drops on her lips. "Easy, sweetheart. You're okay. You're safe now." The boy knelt beside her, tears streaming down his face. I didn't know what else to do. I was trying to tell people, but no one understood my signals. Seagal put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing, kid. You kept calm. You saved your sister." Chuck looked at the shattered window, then back at the boy. "Those hand signals you were doing, what were they?" The boy sniffled. "I learned them in school. They told us how to get attention from far away without yelling, in case we ever needed help." I was trying to show the car, then point to her. I didn't know how else to make people look. Chuck nodded slowly, realization dawning. "And we thought you were warning someone about something shady." The boy shook his head desperately. "No, sir. I just needed help." Nobody stopped. Until you did. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Seagal looked around. A few onlookers had gathered, phones out, whispering. A woman came running from the corner store, her shopping bags flying as she saw the broken car window. "My baby," she screamed, rushing forward. "What happened?" The boy stood and threw his arms around her. "Mom!" She was trapped. I couldn't open the door. Chuck stood up, gesturing calmly. "Ma'am, your daughter was overheating. Your son did everything right. We just helped get her out." The woman hugged both children tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, thank you, thank you. I was only gone 2 minutes." Seagal's tone softened. 2 minutes in this heat can be dangerous. You're lucky he was paying attention." The woman nodded shakily, guilt written across her face. She looked at her son, then back at the two men. "I don't know how to thank you." Chuck smiled faintly. "You already did? You've got a son who doesn't give up, and that's something special." A few minutes later, the police arrived. After a brief explanation, it was clear no one was in trouble. It had all been a misunderstanding born from good intentions. As the officers left, Chuck and Seagal leaned against their SUV, watching the family drive away together. Seagal shook his head. "We really thought the worst, didn't we?" Chuck sighed. "Yeah, goes to show how easy it is to misread people, especially when you're only looking through the lens of suspicion." Seagal smirked. "You're getting philosophical on me, Norris." Chuck chuckled softly. "Maybe. But that kid reminded me of something. Real heroes don't always wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they're just scared kids doing the right thing." They stood there for a while, watching the sunset creep over the city skyline. The air was calmer now, the tension gone, replaced by something humbler. Before getting back into the SUV, Chuck turned to Seagal. "Next time we see something strange, maybe we ask questions first before assuming the worst." Seagal grinned. "Yeah, but I'm still breaking the glass if I have to." Chuck laughed. "Fair enough. Now that's what I call a real twist. Two action legends learning a powerful lesson from a brave kid. But what would you have done if you were in Chuck's shoes? Would you have stepped in, or kept driving thinking it wasn't your business? Let me know in the comments, Mice, and tell us. Where in the world are you watching from?" That evening, as the city lights flickered on and traffic buzzed along the streets, a young woman named Tanya uploaded a short clip to her social media account. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal helped save a child. But the story behind this moment will change how you see people forever. Within hours, the clip spread like wildfire. It showed everything. The boy waving his arms in distress, the two men approaching, the moment of confusion, and finally the dramatic rescue. The audio captured Chuck's calm instructions and Seagal's decisive move to break the glass. But what really caught people's attention wasn't the action, it was the humanity. The top comment under the video read, "At first I thought that kid was in trouble with them. Turns out he was the real hero." Soon, thousands of people began sharing their own thoughts, their own experiences, moments when they had been judged wrongly because of how they looked or where they came from. Chuck sat by the window sipping a black coffee, watching the morning headlines scroll across the TV screen. Viral heroes Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, and a brave boy save child in heatwave drama. The anchor continued. What began as a misunderstanding has turned into a worldwide discussion about perception, prejudice, and courage. Millions online are praising the boy's quick thinking and the humility of two action legends who admitted their mistake. Seagal walked in, sunglasses perched on his head, holding his phone. "You're trending again, partner," he said with a smirk. Chuck shook his head. "Guess I should be used to it by now. But this one feels different." Seagal sat down. "Different how?" Chuck leaned back. "Because it's not about us. It's about that kid. The whole world saw him today, saw what courage really looks like, and they also saw what happens when we jump to conclusions." Seagal nodded slowly, scrolling through his feed. "You know what gets me? The number of comments from parents saying they're teaching their kids those same emergency signals now. That boy might have saved more lives than he realizes." Meanwhile, in a modest part of town, the boy, Jalen, was sitting on his porch steps, holding his sister on his lap. His mom stood nearby, phone in hand, overwhelmed by the flood of messages pouring in. "People from all over the world are writing to you, baby," she said, tears in her eyes. "From London, Manila, Johannesburg, Toronto. They all say you're a hero." Jalen looked confused. "For what?" "I just did what anyone would do." His mom smiled softly. "Not everyone would have stayed calm, Jalen. Not everyone would have known what to do. You did." Just then, a familiar SUV rolled down the street. The crowd of neighbors started to murmur and point. The doors opened, and out stepped Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. Jalen's eyes widened. "No way." Chuck smiled warmly. "Hey, champ. We were in the neighborhood." Jalen ran up and shook their hands, his little sister peeking shyly from behind him. Seagal handed him a small box. Inside was a pair of gloves, signed by both men with a note. To Jalen, a real fighter, "You've got more courage than most action heroes ever will." Jalen's face lit up, his grin wide and genuine. "Thank you, but I don't fight," Chuck chuckled. "You don't have to. Sometimes standing up and doing the right thing, that's the real fight." The crowd around them applauded, phones out again, capturing another powerful moment. But this time it wasn't just about a rescue. It was about respect, redemption, and recognition. A local TV station brought all three together, Chuck, Seagal, and Jalen, for an interview. The host asked Chuck the question everyone had been wondering. "Mr. Norris, what was going through your mind when you first saw Jalen?" Chuck didn't hesitate. "Honestly, I thought he might have been signaling trouble, maybe warning someone. I made a judgment based on what I saw, not what was true." "That's on me." The host turned to Seagal. "And when you found out the truth?" Seagal smiled faintly. "It humbled me. We live in a world where people make snap judgments every day. But this reminded me that compassion should come before suspicion." Then she asked Jalen, "How did it feel to have these two legends help you?" Jalen laughed. "At first I was scared they thought I was doing something wrong. But when they helped me, I realized heroes aren't just in movies. They're people who care enough to stop and listen." The audience clapped, and for a brief moment, the studio lights reflected off three very different faces, but united by one shared truth. That moment, captured by a stranger, shared across the world, became more than just a viral clip. It became a mirror showing all of us how easily we can misread others, and how powerful it is when we choose understanding instead of fear. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal didn't just save a little girl that day. They saved themselves from a dangerous habit we all fall into, judging too quickly. But what about you? Have you ever been misjudged or judged someone else too soon? Tell your story in the comments and let's keep this conversation going. And before you go, drop the word unity if you believe kindness should always come before assumptions. It had been 3 weeks since the incident. The video of Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, and Jalen had crossed over 200 million views across social media. News anchors called it the hand signal story. Teachers were discussing it in classrooms, and communities around the world were using it as a case study about empathy, perception, and courage. For Chuck and Seagal, life had changed too, but not in the usual Hollywood way. They weren't being called for red carpets or premieres. They were being invited to schools, youth programs, and police academies. Everyone wanted to hear their side of the story. the side that wasn't about action or fame, but humility. Rows of new cadets sat silently as Chuck Norris took the stage, his voice calm but powerful. "You all signed up to serve and protect," he began, "but sometimes protecting means seeing the truth, even when it doesn't fit what you expect to see." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "A few weeks ago, I misread a boy. I saw signals I didn't understand and I assumed the worst. I've spent decades teaching people how to defend themselves, but that day a kid taught me how to think before reacting." The room stayed still. Every eye was on him. He continued, "Courage isn't just about fighting. It's about patience, compassion, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. That boy reminded me that our job, whether you wear a badge or not, is to protect innocence, not assumptions." A wave of quiet applause spread through the hall. When the speech ended, one young cadet raised her hand. "Mr. Norris, do you ever feel guilty that you assumed wrong that day?" Chuck smiled faintly. "Every day. But guilt isn't always bad. It's a teacher. It reminds us we can do better next time, and that's what growth looks like." The cadets nodded, many jotting notes as if they just heard a lecture that would stay with them forever. Across town, Seagal was at a community center in a rough neighborhood. The walls were covered in murals of unity, fists raised, hands clasped, children of different races painted side by side. He stood before a group of teenagers, some shy, some skeptical, most holding their phones ready to record. "So," one kid asked, crossing his arms, "you're saying you learned something from a kid?" Seagal grinned. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And I've worked with soldiers, cops, and martial artists all over the world. But that boy, Jalen, he showed me what real discipline looks like. He didn't panic. He didn't fight. He stayed calm when adults were losing it." The room was quiet. Then a girl in the back said softly, "Most people wouldn't have even stopped to help." Seagal nodded. "Exactly. And that's the point. We can all be heroes in our own way, but only if we care enough to look deeper before we judge." He looked around the room and added, "If you remember one thing from today, let it be this. The world doesn't need more fighters, it needs more listeners." The line hit hard. Even the skeptical teens clapped. A week later, a citywide charity event was held in the same park where everything had happened. Families gathered, kids played, and a small stage had been set up with banners reading, "Unity Day, celebrating courage, compassion, and second chances." Jalen was there with his mom and sister, now healthy and full of life. He wore the signed gloves Chuck and Seagal had given him. The mayor stepped up to the mic and called him a symbol of hope. Then, to the crowd's surprise, Chuck and Seagal appeared on stage beside Jalen. Chuck put his arm around the boy. "This young man reminded us that no matter how much strength or fame you have, it means nothing if you don't use it for good." The crowd cheered. Seagal leaned into the mic. "This is our message to the world. Don't judge. Help. Don't fear differences. Understand them." Then Jalen spoke, nervously at first, but with growing confidence. "I'm just a kid," he said. "But I learned something that day. Sometimes people won't see you for who you are. They'll see what they think you are. But you can't let that stop you from doing the right thing." Applause erupted across the park. In that moment, Chuck looked out at the crowd, families, officers, teachers, kids, and smiled. He realized something profound. Strength doesn't come from how hard you hit, but how open your heart is. Later that night, the new footage from the Unity Day event went viral. But this time it wasn't about action or drama. It was about hope. Clips of Jalen's speech, Chuck's message, and Seagal's humility spread across TikTok, YouTube, and news outlets. Hashtags like Unity Day, Listen Before You Judge, and Usher Real Heroes began trending worldwide. In one viral comment, someone wrote, "3 generations, 3 worlds, a boy, 2 legends, 1 powerful lesson. Humanity still exists." And that's how a misunderstanding turned into a movement. From one small act of courage came a wave of compassion that reached millions. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal may have been the action stars, but it was Jalen who taught the world what real heroism looks like. Now it's your turn. If you believe understanding is stronger than judgment, type humanity in the comments and tell us. What's one moment in your life when someone surprised you by doing the right thing? Let's fill this space with stories that remind us why kindness matters. Months had passed since Unity Day. The world had moved on to new headlines, new stories, but for the people at the heart of it, that one summer afternoon still echoed in their minds. For Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, and young Jalen, it had become more than just a viral moment. It was a shared story, one that changed how they saw the world and themselves. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide ranch windows. Chuck sat on his porch sipping coffee, his old Stetson hat resting beside him. A letter sat open on the table, written in a child's uneven handwriting. "Dear Mr. Norris, I showed your video to my class. We made a promise to never judge anyone before we know the truth. Thank you for teaching us to look deeper. Evan, age 10. Chuck smiled softly, folding the letter carefully. He had received hundreds like it, from schools, parents, police departments, even military units. He leaned back, remembering Jalen's face. The fear, the courage, the calm. "That boy's gonna change the world," he murmured. His wife walked out, setting a hand on his shoulder. "You already did your part, Chuck?" He shook his head. "No, hon." This time he did. At a small dojo in Los Angeles, Seagal stood before a group of young students. No cameras, no fame, just discipline, movement, and respect. "Balance isn't just physical," he told them, guiding a student's stance. "It's in how we see others, too." He paused, looking around. "You can train for years to fight, but the real power is when you don't have to." The students nodded silently. One boy raised his hand. "Sensei Seagal, did you really break a car window to save someone?" Seagal smiled faintly. "Yeah, I did. But that's not the important part. The important part is why. You see, sometimes doing the right thing isn't about strength, it's about heart." He took a deep breath, his voice softer now. "And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Real heroes stay humble." Meanwhile, across town, Jalen's life had completely changed. He and his family had moved into a safer neighborhood, thanks to donations from people around the world who were inspired by his bravery. But Jalen hadn't let fame change him. He spent his weekends volunteering at a youth center, teaching kids how to recognize danger signals and how to use communication and empathy instead of fear. During one session, a little girl asked, "Do you miss being famous?" Jalen laughed. "I'm not famous. I'm just me. The day people stop talking about me, that's okay, as long as they remember what happened." His mom, watching from the back of the room, smiled proudly. Later that night, as he packed up his things, Jalen found the gloves Chuck and Seagal had given him. He slid them on and whispered, "For courage." Then he looked up at the poster on the wall, the Unity Day banner with the words, "Don't judge. Help." He grinned. Still true. A few months later, a documentary premiered on streaming platforms, Signals of Courage, The Day the World Listened. It chronicled the entire story, from the misunderstanding to the rescue, the viral fame, and the global movement that followed. Clips of Jalen's Unity Day speech played alongside interviews with Chuck, Seagal, and even the first responders who arrived that day. In one of the final scenes, Chuck said quietly, "I've done hundreds of action films, but this was the most real story of all. Because no stunt, no fight, no movie can match the courage of a kid who acted on love." Then Seagal added, "The boy didn't just save his sister. He reminded the world that skin color, status, or fame don't define a hero. Character does." The documentary ended with footage of Jalen laughing with other kids, free, genuine, and full of hope. As the credits rolled, comments poured in online. "This story restored my faith in humanity. I showed this to my class." Every student was silent by the end. That boy is what the world needs right now. 6 months later, Chuck and Seagal visited Jalen's new school by surprise. The principal led them into the gym where hundreds of kids sat waiting. When Jalen saw them, his jaw dropped. "You came back." Chuck grinned. "Told you we'd check on our little hero." The crowd erupted in cheers. Seagal took the mic. "We came to see how our friend's doing, and to remind everyone here that courage doesn't have an age limit." Then Chuck looked at the students and said, "What happened that day started with one simple thing, a signal. But it became something bigger, a reminder that the world changes when we stop assuming the worst and start believing in the best." He turned to Jalen. You showed us that, son. Jalen smiled. Guess we all learned something, huh? Seagal laughed. Yeah, and this time, no windows had to break. The entire gym burst into laughter and applause. That one misunderstanding, a boy's hand signals, a moment of judgment, and two legends who chose compassion over pride became a story the world will never forget. Jalen, Chuck Norris, and Steven Seagal didn't just cross paths by chance, and they crossed paths by purpose. And maybe that's life's biggest lesson. Every person you meet might be fighting a battle you don't see. So before you judge, take a moment to listen. If you believe the world needs more people like Jalen, people who act with courage, not prejudice, drop the word. Respect in the comments, and don't forget, subscribe for more stories that prove kindness is the strongest power of all. It's been 1 year since the day the world listened. What started as a misunderstanding between two action legends and a scared young boy had now turned into a worldwide movement, a call to see people before judging. Documentaries, school programs, even law enforcement workshops had adopted the phrase born from that day. Don't judge, help. A series of TV clips plays across screens around the world. BBC anchor. Inspired by the viral hand signal story, over 30 schools across the US and Asia have launched empathy training programs for students. CNN reporter. Police departments are using the footage in their training sessions to teach better communication and emotional intelligence. Local Filipino news. Jalen's story continues to inspire. This week, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal visited Manila for a global youth summit on compassion. Social media clip. Our Real Heroes and Unity Day trends again after emotional reunion video breaks 100 million views. The screen fades out on one line that appears everywhere. Billboards, posters, shirts. A misunderstanding became a message. The convention center was packed. Over 5,000 people, students, teachers, law officers, and community leaders had gathered to hear from three unexpected speakers. Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, and Jalen. Chuck stood at the podium first, looking over the massive audience. I fought a lot of battles in my life, he began, his voice calm but full of emotion. But none of them taught me as much as one young boy did that afternoon. The audience listened in silence. I learned that strength isn't about control, Chuck continued. It's about humility. It's about admitting when you were wrong and doing better next time. Then Seagal stepped forward. For years, people called me a fighter. But lately, I've learned there's something harder than fighting. Forgiving. Forgiving others, forgiving yourself, and choosing peace over pride. He looked directly at Jalen, who was sitting beside his mother in the front row, and this young man showed the whole world how to do it. The audience burst into applause as Jalen stood and walked onto the stage. He was taller now, more confident, dressed in a simple suit and wearing the same gloves Chuck and Seagal had given him. Still a little big, but now symbolic. Jalen took the mic. His voice was steady. When everything happened that day, I didn't know it would change anything. I was just scared for my sister, but now, seeing everyone here, I realized something. He looked around the hall. It doesn't matter how old you are or what color your skin is or where you come from. Anyone can be a reason someone else finds hope. The entire hall stood, clapping, cheering, and many wiping away tears. After the summit, the three sat in the green room, exhausted but smiling. Chuck handed Jalen a bottle of water. You handled that crowd better than any Hollywood star I've seen, Jalen grinned. Guess I had good teachers, Seagal laughed. Don't let him fool you, kid. He never stops being dramatic, Chuck chuckled. Says the man who broke a car window in slow motion. The three burst out laughing, their friendship now as natural as family. Then Chuck turned serious. You know, Jalen, I think this is just the start for you. The world needs more voices like yours. Calm, honest, brave. Jalen shrugged. I'm just trying to do what feels right. Maybe someday I'll start something, like a foundation. Seagal nodded approvingly. When you do, we'll back it. 100%. 6 months after the summit, Jalen officially launched the Hand Signal Project, a global non-profit dedicated to teaching communication, empathy, and first aid awareness in schools and communities. The opening ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., with Chuck and Seagal joining as honorary mentors. News outlets covered the event live. Reporter. What began as a single moment of misunderstanding has become a worldwide initiative helping thousands of children learn how to respond in emergencies and how to treat others with compassion. At the event, Jalen spoke again. Everyone has a signal, not always with their hands, but in their hearts. Sometimes people are asking for help in ways we don't notice. This project is about seeing those signals and responding with kindness. Behind him, a huge screen displayed clips from around the world. Children in Kenya practicing hand signals, firefighters in Japan training with empathy drills, police officers in New York watching the original video during a class. The applause was thunderous. Later that night, after the crowd dispersed, Chuck and Seagal stood together outside under the city lights. Chuck said softly, "We started this thinking we were helping a boy. Turns out he helped the world." Seagal nodded. "He reminded us that the smallest moment can rewrite a million lives." Chuck smiled. "And maybe that's the lesson. It's never too late to change what kind of story you're telling the world." They watched as Jalen spoke with reporters nearby, his mom standing proudly beside him. The kid who once waved desperately for help was now giving hope to millions. A misunderstanding in one neighborhood became a movement that crossed oceans. From one brave boy's hand signals came a global message, and one that continues to ripple across hearts, schools, and communities. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal learned that true strength isn't in fighting, it's in listening. And Jalen taught the world that being seen, heard, and believed can save lives. So now it's your turn. What will your signal be? If you believe kindness can go viral, type hope in the comments. And remember, one act of understanding can echo across the world. A bright classroom in Los Angeles buzzed with laughter and energy. Children practiced communication drills, learning to recognize nonverbal signals and respond with empathy. At the front of the room stood Jalen, now 24, wearing a simple black shirt with the project's logo. A hand raised halfway, symbolizing both help and peace. He smiled as a little boy raised his hand eagerly. "Mr. Jalen, is it true Chuck Norris taught you how to fight bad guys?" The class giggled. Jalen chuckled softly. "Sort of," he said, "but he really taught me something better. How to not fight when you don't have to." The children nodded, taking the lesson more seriously than most adults might. Just then, his assistant entered and whispered something in Jalen's ear. His eyes widened, then softened. "Class, I'll be right back," he said gently. Moments later, Jalen entered a local hospital room. Lying on the bed was Chuck Norris. Older now, his beard a little grayer, his eyes still full of the same fire. "Hey, kid," Chuck said weakly but smiling. "Heard you're still changing the world." Jalen laughed, pulling up a chair beside him. "Trying to follow your lead," Chuck chuckled. "No, son. You surpassed it. I used to throw punches. You build peace." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Then Chuck reached over and handed Jalen a small, worn leather notebook. "This was mine back when I was your age. Notes, thoughts, even regrets. I think it belongs to you now." Jalen held it carefully, feeling the weight of history in his hands. "Thank you," he said softly. Chuck smiled faintly. "Keep teaching them, Jalen. Keep showing the world how to listen." Jalen squeezed his hand. "I promise." A month later, on the anniversary of the hand signal movement, Jalen stood on stage at the United Nations World Day of Compassion. Behind him, massive screens displayed faces from every continent. Children, teachers, officers, doctors, all forming the same hand signal of hope. 10 years ago, Jalen began, his voice steady. A scared boy tried to ask for help, but no one understood his signal. Now millions of people across the world understand what it means. He paused as images of Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal appeared on screen, both smiling in old footage. "They taught me that real heroes don't fight for attention. They fight for understanding." The crowd of delegates, journalists, and leaders gave a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Jalen looked upward briefly, whispering a silent thank you. Back in his hotel room, Jalen opened the old leather notebook Chuck had given him. Inside, the first page read, "A man's strength isn't in his fist, it's in his heart." He smiled, closing the book slowly, then looked out the window at the glowing city below. In the distance, billboards displayed the foundation's new slogan, "See the signal. Be the answer." The world had come a long way, And it all began with a single act of misunderstanding that turned into a message of unity. A boy once raised his hands out of fear. 10 years later, the world raises theirs, not to fight but to connect. Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, and Jalen showed us that one small moment of empathy can rewrite history. The ripple never stopped. It became a wave of change. If you believe that kindness can change the world, type unity in the comments. And remember, your compassion might be the signal someone's waiting for.